7, I think. So we don't know what is in the next books. What we're trying to do is just think about and examine what Nietzsche is writing right now. It's just as if we bought the book new. And so that's the way we've been approaching this, more or less, and that's the way I'd like to continue to approach it. So what I'm after are your thoughts about each aphorism. I'm going to offer my 2 cents worth, and then you can offer your agreement or disagreement. And try to stick to the text as best you can if you're going to make any kind of comment on what Nietzsche is saying. So we got through the first 4 aphorisms, and now we're on aphorism 5. And there seems to be a bit of a theme that's not necessarily consistent, but there's 2 things that I've sort of noticed. One is that he's concerned about existing systems of morality, and he's interested in criticizing them, being very critical of them. So in aphorism 4, he took on utilitarianism. And he may have done it before, and he may do it later, but right now that was sort of his thing. The division of good and bad into expedient and inexpedient is a problem. So what he's doing in aphorism 5 is he's addressing Kant's categorical imperative. And the interesting thing here is that he is not presenting an argument against the categorical imperative or any of the way that Kant arrived at the categorical imperative. What he's saying is that it's a problem. And the way he sums this up, let me get to it. And this, I think, he also sort of indicates his position here. So in the second paragraph in the Kaufman translation, he goes, here we have the most natural and usually very influential opponents of moral enlightenment and skepticism. So I get the feeling that Nietzsche is in favor of moral enlightenment and skepticism. A very comprehensive class of such opponents is to be found wherever self-interest requires submission, while reputation and honor seem to prohibit submission. I think, again, this is a little nod toward the idea of nobility. And the very last sentence, reviled servility clings to the categorical imperative and is the mortal enemy of those who wish to deprive duty of its unconditional character. That is what decency demands of them, and not only decency. And I think what he means by not only decency is an intellectual conscience. You don't stop. You continually search for certainty. And that's what I think it's all about. What do you think it's all about? James.
Yeah, I agree. What's emphasized here, I think, is the relationship between, with the footnote, it's the relationship between the categorical imperative and the religious moral impetus. The idea of like creating a absolute religious moralism that can be practiced as duty. And then at the end, this refined, I wanted to accent that the refined, the quote in the footnote is to write a history of Italy, quote, to enable the working class to apprehend the mission of Italy in God's providential ordering of the world. So this is a revolutionary working class gentleman in the middle of the somewhere in the middle of the 19th century. That was basically, you know, referring to religion to discuss, you know, some kind of change in the working class that would cause it to um, become take power, right? Essentially, which a lot of people in Europe were interested in doing. Um, and then you have the very last sentence: the refined servility clings to the categorical imperative. These are the servants, the people who want to serve someone. They want to serve God. They want devotion to be first, you know, and so forth. And so, and they are the mortal enemy of those who wish to deprive duty of its unconditional character. In other words, if we have a duty, we can say continue or stop. We we should always have that imperative as individuals, and this is a human right. That notion. And many people in the 19th century did not believe in that. They thought the duty should be unconditional because God was in control, and any challenge to duty would be a challenge to God. And even, I believe that a lot of when Kant is referring to duty, he refers to it that way, as if which should maybe be something. And people who are Kantians still talk that way sometimes, that the duty is first, and why not have the duty and do the duty and make it imperative, because that's the word in categorical imperative. So depriving it of its unconditional character, this is what decency demands: human rights, and not only
Well,
decency. So that's I just wanted to accent that. That's his point. He's creating a right to not, for the categorical imperative or any imperative or any duty, not to be unconditional.
well, he's not creating a right. I think you're a little off base with human rights and you're bringing your own thinking into this. I don't think there's anything in there
Well,
that
my thinking
suggests,
is that he's my thinking is that he's revolutionary, and this is one of his revolutionary ideas that he's bringing forward: the idea that
we don't,
imperatives, that duty is not imperative, it's conditional.
okay, yes, Guam.
Okay, so what I want to address is the notion of dignity, and this word appears in the text. And first, I want to read this 5 or 6 lines concerning what he wants to say about dignity. Whoever feels his dignity violated by the thought of being the instrument of a prince or party or sect or even a financial power, say as the descendant of an own proud family, but still wants to or must be this instrument before himself and before the public, needs poignant principles that can be mouthed anytime, principles of an unconditional art to which one may openly submit and be seen to have submitted without shame. So I would say that I want to tackle the ideas from the psychological angle, in the sense that it takes a lot of courage sometimes to go against established principles by the authorities or by people in power. And a lot of people would want to submit because, after all, they would go with what is expedient and convenient and allowing to have money, reputation, a career, but still they want to preserve a little bit their dignity. So they want a framework, a social construct to which they can cling precisely, and I read the last words, to which one may openly submit and be seen to have submitted without shame. Okay, so they can do it without shame. I stop here.
Okay, James.
Yeah, I probably agree with everything that's been said about the category imperative is the unconditional confidence of others rather than having confidence in yourself as a standard for moral behavior, and that the whole idea of the maybe morality is defined by others, and that's how Kant defined morality, right? That it's based on the universalizing of the other, and that kind of is the basis for your individual freedom. That you are free because you have this confidence in the sublime commandment of others, something outside of yourself. And so the category imperative could be related to the Christian commandments or God and so forth. But it's really based on the universality of others. And so in this paragraph here in the middle there, that because they want the unconditional confidence of others, they first need unconditional confidence in themselves on the basis of some ultimate, indisputable, and inherently sublime commandment. And they want to feel like and pass themselves off as its servants and instruments. Yeah, so I think it relates to Nietzsche's idea of also the idea of that the individual needs to detach itself from the herd in order to be an individual and find its standard of morality based on that instead of on the herd. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure that your interpretation of Kant is correct. I think that Kant, actually, it's an individual decision, but the individual decision has to be based on your action being able to be made into a universal law. I may have that wrong, but I think I've got that right. So it's really your own choice. And so what I think he's talking about here, like revolutionary politicians, socialists,
I think that's what I was trying to say. I think it has to do with individual universalizing. And in that way, that's the only way Kant can define individual freedom. It's based on the universalizing standard of others. And so you can't have individual freedom without the others, without taking the commandment of others. Somehow that's very paradoxical, but yeah.
Okay. So Nietzsche is identifying himself as in favor of moral enlightenment and skepticism. And that's the approach he's taking here. So he doesn't want a set of rules. He's already gone against the whole Manichaean notion, like I said earlier, of good and evil being applied in different ways. So it's not either one thing or the other thing. And here he's taking on this whole notion that duty, unconditional duty, is something you should avoid doing because it isn't necessarily a universal rule and shouldn't be. Jason.
Excuse me, ma'am, but somebody just private messaged me something very rude, and yeah, I'd like you to do something about it. It was Brian Cowley. He messaged me, come over, little girl. I'll be there in 5 minutes.
Really?
Yeah, I think he might be a Zoom bomber.
Hold on, Cherry, you are speaking?
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think he might be a Zoom bomber.
He sent a private a message to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Brian?
Brian, you have
Brian,
something to say? Otherwise, I will remove you. Okay. Brian once, Brian twice. Brian has been here many times.
yeah, I know. Too bad. Oh, well, I don't think he's ever said anything, though. I think I called on somebody. Are you going to throw him out, Jason?
I will watch. Okay.
Who did I call on? Because I don't remember. Somebody had their hand up.
Jason.
Jason.
It was
Jason.
I have
Okay.
my hands up,
I'm
but I
gonna throw
forget.
him.
But anyway, okay, I'm thinking about, well, I agree with you what you talk about the categorical imperative. That's Kant's morality. And I think important is the categorical versus hypothetical. So that's why I think the Kant's idea is quite clear, but I'm not very clear what's Nietzsche's position, because he sounds like he talking about the moral enemy who want to deprive duty of its unconditional character. Unconditional would be same as the categorical. So be honest, I agree with you. He want to get rid of the rule, and the rule is the moral law. According to Kant, moral law has only one rule, which is categorical imperative. So Nietzsche even want to get this single only, okay, moral law. So yeah, that's what I feel, but I'm not very sure what Nietzsche want to do, and he probably thinking about decency. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think it's not clear. You have to interpret in a way, and that's what I was doing earlier. In that first thing that I read, here we have the most natural and usually very influential opponents of moral enlightenment and skepticism. And then at the end, he mentions again the mortal enemy of those. In a way, this is just an observation. And a lot of these things are just observations. He's not staking out a position here. He's pointing something out. And I think that leaves a certain amount of room. And I think that's characteristic of a lot of the things that we've read so far. He's not typical philosophers, opening an argument and then building the argument and demolishing his rivals. He's just pointing out observing these things. We haven't had a whole lot of I statements in here, and we may not. So I think that this is just a provocation. But I do think he's suggesting which side he's on by that phrase that I wrote, moral enlightenment and skepticism. Quan.
I think it's very interesting. Okay, in my opinion, he was attacking, but in sotto voce, in a soft manner, the idea of the categorical imperative, because I just want to remind a very short definition of categorical imperative. It is in ethics, in Kantian ethics, an unconditional moral obligation which is binding in all circumstances and not dependent on a person's inclination or purpose. Meaning that categorical imperative has the pretension to be quasi-religious and did not take into account a person's psychology or the person's social circumstances. And when precisely in his paragraph, Nietzsche was talking of dignity and of the fact that we need something, an unconditional art to which one may openly submit and be seen to have submitted without shame. For me, it was an ironical attack against that categorical imperative precisely. And the next paragraph about refined servility clings to the categorical imperative.
Lindsay, are you blasting steroids? Because you're so red and
What?
I think that she said, "Are you so red?" It's not about the categorical imperative.
Okay, I think Brian is not bummer. Okay, Cherry is a bummer. So That's why I'm
What's
watching.
happening here? This is crazy. This is happening.
Yeah. Wow. Because the Nietzsche always attract bummer. Okay, so
Maybe
Anyway, I want to
maybe I
congratulate Jason for his mind.
just a minute, John, just a minute. Maybe I threw Brian out too quickly, but he did
yeah,
not.
I think you saw. That's why I put on hold because I kind of worry Cherry and not Brian. So
Okay, but Brian didn't say anything. That was anyway. Go
yeah,
ahead.
Brian has been many times, so I don't believe so. But anyway, don't worry.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just
Yeah,
apologize to him privately. That'll be fine. So
okay, quantum.
yes, and here is a very perfect illustration that there is no categorical imperative and that we have to take into account social and psychological factors. That being said, I have finished what I have to say, that all the paragraph is a very refined attack sotto voce against the idea of categorical imperative, which is precisely that unconditional universal moral obligation. And here Nietzsche, in let's say in layers, would rather promote the idea that we have to take into account the dignity, the personal proclivities and purposes of each person. I stop here.
Yeah. Sotto voce is a good way to put it. I like the way you said that. Freud.
In the case, I think Nietzsche here turns concepts of other philosophers and of society and in general on its head. As I see it, the question relates to what are the ends of our behavior when we have to work in a social hierarchy or context. So if you want to be the instrument of, as it says, of a prince or party or sect or financial power, you have to, if you're unconditionally, if you're just absolutely have a base servility as opposed to a refined servility, then you'll do whatever that power says, and you will sacrifice your dignity thereby, sacrifice all dignity. However, according to Nietzsche, if you want a patina of respectability preserved, i.e., you want a refined servility, then you still can be the instrument of a power, but you dress it up by saying it's a categorical imperative. And therefore, I'm behaving on the basis of a categorical imperative, when in fact, you are still obeying this prince or party. It's really the opposite of what Kant says, at least in his groundworks and metaphysics of morals. He makes a clear distinction. He says that the ends of our behavior can be either a price or dignity. By price, he goes on to say what he means is that it's contextual, it's conditional, according to what this or that power says, according to whether our behavior satisfies some material ends, say. And he contrasts that with dignity, and he claims that the categorical imperative in his notion of morality is the ground of dignity. So you don't have dignity unless you ground your behavior in a categorical imperative. Because if you don't base it on a categorical imperative, then it's just, as he says, a price of your behavior, and will be subject to the vicissitudes of the context in which you operate. So he sets up an odd notion here, an odd contrast, where where Kant would say that servility in general is counter to the categorical imperative. highly counter to it. In fact, kind of the opposite. If your behavior is based on servility, then according to Kant, it's self-interested, and therefore you are not moral according to the categorical imperative. Whereas Nietzsche defines this refined servility that clings to the categorical imperative. And by saying that, I think he means he seems to indicate that it's really just show. So I'm not. So I agree that this is descriptive. He's not necessarily writing against the categorical imperative. He's saying that if you want to retain some shroud of dignity, then one way to do it is to pretend that you're operating according to the categorical imperative, when in fact you're being the servile instrument of a prince or party. And his tongue is firmly in cheek, I think, throughout this paragraph when he talks about decency. For him, decency is something that should be placed in quotes, I think, most of the time. That's all.
Yeah, I would completely disagree with you there. I don't think that Nietzsche ever thought of himself as an indecent man or a philosopher. I think decency is an important word that's used here, and I also think that dignity is an important word. And what he's criticizing are people who don't pretend to have a categorical imperative, but actually embrace the idea. I think that's what he's saying. Like, if you are servile to a prince and somehow the prince is embarrassing you, you really can believe deeply that it would be a universal law that if you are, let's say, the treasurer of the prince, you ought to obey and do what the prince says to do. And that, I think, is what he's criticizing here. He's making an observation that it's troublesome, it's problematic, this whole idea of a universal law that it cannot. James.
Yeah, there's a couple of ideas here. One is whether, as you said, Lindsay he's a decent man. So how could he be against decency? And the other is the idea that, but he's talking about how decency, he's not talking about himself being decent. He's talking about how people, some people have decency demanded of them. So, and those would be those, I suppose, those who wish to deprive duty of its unconditional character, which I take the side of, that Nietzsche wishing for, that there be an unconditional character, to the categorical imperative, or whatever imperative is being followed. I think when he talks about Manzini, and he talks about the comprehensive class of opponents to be found, of the opponents of moral enlightenment and skepticism, right? So he's a skeptic. He's talking about people who, and he believes in moral enlightenment. So that the people who are influential opponents, and he says they're a minority, but when he's talking about them as an exception. He says there's a comprehensive class that require because when self-interest requires submission, while reputation and honor seem to prohibit it. So in other words, you have to protect yourself by being outside the rules. Dignity, maybe that was the word, yeah. So dignity is incompatible with the thought of being the instrument of a prince, not following orders, or a party, or a sect, or even worse, of a financial power, say because he's the descendant of an old and proud family who nevertheless wants to or must be such an instrument before himself and before the public. In other words, you can't lose face. So if you can't lose face, you might want to reject the edicts of a superior law. So, and that's the idea he's putting forth here, and he's putting it forward as a kind of an exception, right? So and doing things to avoid shame, he says at the end, so that's my idea. This is people who have to. This is an exception, and the other exception is the idea of Manzini, the guy who wants to create a revolution, but it has to follow all the edicts of the church, kind of idea. And of course, that was also Mussolini's idea, incidentally. So yeah, and so so I'm just saying that there's a lot of clues here. This is not a bad argument. In other words, this is just an argument that is not entirely linear. This is an argument with exceptions. This is an argument that promotes the exceptions and then suggests that maybe with these exceptions, perhaps we can prove the rule that there should be unconditional, that duty might have to have an unconditional character at times. I think that's the main point he's arguing for, using these exceptions to kind of prove the rule. And there's a lot of ways to make the argument sound circular. So, but I do think that's more or less where he's going. He is going to the idea that there can't be an imperative. It has to be a conditional imperative, if there ever is one.
Yeah,
That's where he disagrees with Kant, by the way, and that's where other people
Yeah.
have suggested that Kant's idea is a religious idea. Other critics of Kant.
yeah, I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to take it at face value. I don't think we should think of this as any kind of argument. I think this is an observation and a comment. And it's maybe part of some kind of argument that can be put together somewhere else or in some way. But this particular piece, I don't think is argumentative. He is just saying, this is what happens to these people in this circumstance. And this is a problem with the categorical imperative. James K.
Yeah, it's not an argument, but he is making critique, right, of those people who follow the categorical imperative, and that they are following a universal ethical principle regardless of their desires or circumstances. And in that way, they're being used as instruments by the powers that promote the this kind of categorical imperative. And Nietzsche is saying that there is no such thing as a universal principle, absolute universal principle that applies to everyone, and that there are, under certain different conditions, different cultures could have different moral imperatives, right? They're relative, rather than absolute standards of behavior and moral attitudes, and that and I think that's what he's saying, and that those people who believe this, the categorical imperative, are just being used by the powers that are in that society, that promote that kind of moral imperative. Yeah, thanks.
Well, it's the moral imperative is made by the person himself in making the servile behavior his duty. He is doing that. The prince or whoever, the bank president, isn't making him do it. He is choosing to say, it's my duty to do this thing, and believing it.
Exactly.
That's what I think Nietzsche is criticizing, is
right.
that is the pretense is that you are retaining your dignity by observing that duty.
Right. It clearly states that the people who are doing that, making that choice, lack the kind of confidence in themselves, right? They seem to have more confidence in the other other people who are promoting this this idea of a moral absolute. and they're buying into it because of their lack of confidence in themselves.
Well, okay, Kwon.
Okay. Often when I discuss Nietzsche, I like to use the expression an event horizon or a horizon. I would say that the categorical imperative can be perceived as a kind of horizon, an event horizon, an ideal. But here, I don't feel that Nietzsche is rejecting that possibility of categorical imperative, but what he was inviting people is precisely to go on their own journey to discover their own rooms for their own autonomous morality, if you want, rather than precisely, I think it has been said, but I repeat that again, rather than to use that idea of duty as an excuse precisely to keep their dignity. But what is true is that they don't dare to ask for themselves the basic question why I should obey that duty precisely. And in traditional societies, the idea of duties is precisely to preserve the dignity of weaker people who can take shelter under the umbrella of that idea to preserve once again their dignity and their decency. I stop here.
James.
Yeah, yes, I'll be quick. The thing I forgot to mention before was Nietzsche's idea of will. He believed that there was an important impetus in will and power, so that people with power would.
No, we don't know that. We do not know that.
But he does talk about it a lot in this section. So he does, and throughout the book. So I'm just saying it is related to his concept of will to truth and will to power, of course, which he gets to by part 4 of the book anyway. Yeah.
He gets to it in Zarathustra. That's
which this book is very close to. Yeah. A lot of duplication of ideas.
With the emphasis on free. So we're not going to go to will to power. We're not going to go to Übermensch. We're not going to do any of that. We don't know that yet.
But he's talked a lot about will, even in the other papers. So in the other essays. Yeah.
No, we're getting to the important aphorism, which is like 2 away from where we are right now. That begins the exploration. That's all. I think that's all that's going on here. He is sort of identifying himself as a patron of moral enlightenment and skepticism. He hasn't yet asserted every man for himself. He's going to get there, but he's not there yet. This is just an observation that as a broad rule for moral behavior, the categorical imperative fails. So, okie dokie. All right.
You like to limit things, don't you, Lindsay?
What?
You like to limit ideas, don't you?
Well, these are fairly compact, and there's a tendency to go far afield because we all have a lot more knowledge of a lot of other philosophers and even maybe the rest of what Nietzsche wrote. But I think it's fun to just kind of see how carefully he's building his case here. This is just a little teeny piece. I would be amazed if something else doesn't come along where it's a bigger broadside later on. It may even refer back to this aphorism, but I think this is fairly simple in what it's saying. And we're just bringing a whole lot of other stuff in here because we're used to Kant and Hegel and argument building, and this is not like that. This is different. Moving on. Okay. So aphorism 6, loss of dignity. And this again, here comes dignity. So I think there was a previous aphorism, I think it was 3, about noble and common. And so he's also introducing the notion of a noble human being versus run-of-the-mill, the common man. And I think that this is a little piece of developing that again. The phrase I thought was interesting is, we think too fast, even while walking or on the way or while engaged in other things, no matter how serious the subject. I think that speaks to today as readily as it does to his world in 1882. What did you guys think? You don't think anything.
Yeah, this is like
Oh.
it's like a little poem. You know, it's like what is it? There's the thing that goes on the refrigerator. Uh, you know, taking a walk in the woods and doing the right things in life, to take the time to think properly, and so on and so forth. What do you think, Quan?
Well, wait,
Well,
wait, Claude, I didn't call on you yet. In the very last part of this, one even stood, and he's talking about how thinking used to be regarded as worthwhile activity. One even stood still for hours in the middle of the road when the thought arrived, on one leg or 2 legs. That seemed to be required by the dignity of the matter. And that's, again, another observation, but we're getting another picture of what people ought to do that they don't do. Quan.
well, in this case, I think that the key words are precisely in the first sentence. A reflection has lost all its dignity of form, because and the speed is we think too fast, while on our way somewhere, while walking, or in the midst of all sorts of business, is precisely about that dignity of form. And as if we carry around in our heads an unstoppable machine that keeps working even under the most unfavorable circumstances. So here, once again, everything that we read till now is about, do you think for yourself, okay? Or you just repeat like a parrot, the people in authority confer upon you, okay? And here he appears to go to the next step. Okay, maybe I managed to convince you that you have to think for yourself. But for thinking for yourself, you need minimal conditions, okay? What he called the dignity of form. So, meaning giving you some space. I want to read something that I like very much here. Blah blah. It's about silence somewhere. Okay. Okay. We need a little preparation, not even much silence. Okay. So I think here this paragraph. Okay, you're willing, you ready, you wish to embark upon an epistemological journey for thinking for yourself. That's good, but be informed that you need to give yourself minimal conditions to be successful in this endeavor. I stop here.
Okay. All right. I think it's a little simpler than that. I don't think he's encouraging anybody to think for themselves. I think he's encouraging or just opening the idea that thinking all by itself is something people just don't do much. And so there was a time when you could tell that somebody was developing a thought because they were silent and they had a look on their face or whatever it was. That was a time when thinking had more respect. And he's saying that in a modern age, modern Germany, modern today, whatever, to actually stop and think about something is a rare gift that people just don't do, and they don't have any respect for it for people who do it. And I think he's talking about himself here. James.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for me, this one relates a little bit to the last one in that people are, who don't think are really being used as instruments by some, some higher power, social power that is making them, think faster and get things done. So they're like, for them, it's instrumental thinking, whereas the kind of thinking he's talking about is deep, thoughts that occur, inadvertently, and that happens when you're sitting around or just taking a walk, and he's kind of like contrasting that kind of thinking to the kind of superficial, fast thinking that people usually do when they're going about in their business and trying to get things done and so forth. That's sort of like instrumental thinking.
Yeah, which is characteristic of today too. In my own experience, very few people, you're the exceptions, ever think about anything. They hold a lot of positions that they just have, they have no support for. They just picked it up somewhere. It feels good. They don't think. It's like this thing I've got above me. Very popular error, and I'm probably going to repeat this at least 500 times if I live long enough. A very popular error, having the courage of one's convictions. Rather, courage is having the strength for an attack on one's convictions. And not very many people attack their convictions. That's my experience of people in all over the place, most of my life. This I took to heart, and I think is part of what Nietzsche is. It's embedded in there. He's not saying it explicitly though. Jason.
I'm not right now. I'm not sure I'm right or not, but I think I'm thinking he is against the reflection. Okay, so he said reflection has lost all its dignity of form. Does he think reflection is not good? That's what I read before. I'm not sure. How do you think?
I think you're just mistaking what he's saying there. Reflecting has lost all the dignity of its form. The ceremony and solemn gestures of reflecting have become ridiculous, and an old style wise man would be considered intolerable. So reflecting is a virtue. Reflecting is a virtue. And once upon a time, it was held in high esteem. Like, again, this goes back to the Greeks, right? The philosophers and the sophists and that whole crowd were thinkers. And the whole society worked at some of these ideas. The dramatists did, the comedy writers did. These were rich with ideas that people were thinking about all the time. And so what he's saying is reflecting now has lost all of its dignity. Once upon a time, it was respected, and now it's not. But it's a thing to do. He's in favor of reflection, unless somebody else thinks what Jason thinks.
I don't know. Okay, but anyway, I'm debating. So anyway, thank you for say correct me or whatever. So.
James.
Thanks for the question, Jason, because I think at the end he does suggest that when somebody stops in the middle of the street, to think, he has a thought. So he does equate reflection with its product, which would be thought, having a thought. But what I want to know is, since you quoted this, what kind of thought arrives on one leg?
Yeah, I don't know. That may be a jokey thing. It may that may be a German idiom.
Yeah, it might be a joke in German. Yeah,
that's
very good.
Yeah. Quan?
Well, on one or two legs, I have a very easy explanation for that. Since he was advocating for a minimal conditions for the thinking endeavor or the thinking business on two legs would be more comfortable than one leg, I think, for most people. That being said, I want also to make a small comment about the fact that thinking was more respected in ancient times, for example, in ancient Greece. I would say that the dialogues that we have from Plato and from all those thinkers reflect a very small segment of Greek societies of the time. Okay, that being said, I want to come back to what I really want to say. It's about the last paragraph that I want to read. Formally, one could tell just by looking at the person that he wanted to think. It was probably a rare occurrence that he now wanted to become wiser and was preparing himself for thought. One would set one's face as for prayer and stop walking, etc. So it's about the minimal conditions for thinking. But what I want to stress that is still it's about the event horizon. Okay, it's still about the categorical imperative of the unconditional moral obligation, because that he now wanted to become wiser. So still, in the mind of Nietzsche, I think he's still a very classical philosopher, because a philosophy is precisely to become wiser, to be a friend of wisdom. I stop here.
Well, you mean when you say classical, you don't mean Kant, Hegel, Locke,
Oh,
modern.
no. I mean timeless
Hegel.
philosophy. Okay, timeless philosophy. Basic definition of the philosophy: philosophia, to love wisdom.
Love wisdom. Okay. I'll go there. I'll leave that alone. All right. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? All right. Okay. Now, I think that aphorism 7 is a personal statement of Nietzsche's self-identified mission in life. And let me find the part here. Is anyone who now wishes to make a study of moral matters, this very first sentence, opens up for himself an immense field for work. And then at the beginning of the second paragraph, whatever men have so far viewed as the conditions of their existence, and all the reason, passion, and superstition involved in such a view, has this been researched exhaustively? It would be yet, this is the end of that paragraph, it would be yet another job to determine the erroneousness of all these reasons and the whole nature of moral judgments to date. I think this is the goal or the mission. I won't say the goal because I don't think he had an endpoint in mind. I think this was a goal that Nietzsche had, revolving mostly about moral considerations. But this is quite an interesting list, I think. Where could you find a history of love, of avarice, of envy, of conscience, of pious respect for tradition, or of cruelty? And I think this is where, and I know I'm mentioning somebody, Foucault in Discipline and Punish, I think he took him at his word here, which is a stunning piece of work about punishment just in France, though, okay? So there's still more. And what Nietzsche is setting up for himself, I think, and I'm the only reason I'm thinking this is because it sounds like it to me. Audrey.
Yeah, I think you're probably onto something there, because I almost underlined everything in this, because this was something that it seemed like it's not a goal, but it's definitely the questions to ask, and the questions to ask that, now in retrospect, you say a lot of people are asking those same questions and coming up with work, and Foucault came up right away for me. I have that on the side here, and the different ways of looking at things, and then how those same questions are being asked by more current philosophers referencing Nietzsche. So, it's like this circle. And of course, he doesn't know this is happening when he's writing this, but it was just, I mean, to me, it was just really wonderful. It was just like, these are all the questions. And these are still the same questions we're still talking about, which is also quite interesting. So yes, I think he laid out a path for himself. And, I think that his work later on became more and more where people can actually look at it and say, oh, he's getting stronger and stronger, but he's also pissed off too, because nobody's reading his work while he's alive. So he's like, he keeps restating it a little more emphatically, like, no, this is what I'm talking about, stupid. It's like that. So anyway, I found this to be one of my favorites so far out of the 15. So thanks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. I think you have captured a better idea, because in a previous aphorism, he mentioned about questioning things. And that is what this is about. That is what this is about. The mission statement, it's not really one at all, but it's about, there's so many questions that need to be asked to understand a lot of the things we think we know, and referring to the classroom.
This to me is an argument. This to me is using metaphor as a way to make aware. And I do think that's a very sophisticated argument, especially for somebody that we consider mad. I think that madness is one of the most truest things I've read. Anyway, so I disagree with you saying that this isn't some kind of an argument. This is. It's just not what we're used to. Thanks.
What did I say?
You said he's not arguing anything. It's just
Oh,
observation. He's throwing it out. Oh, I think
that
I'll put this in there, make somebody think. I think that was very deliberate. To me, that's an argument, a smart argument.
All right, I accept your interpretation, James.
Hi. Okay, so yeah, I kind of agree with that with everybody today on this one, and that this is I think this is kind of it's very powerful, and of course Foucault comes to mind, but really it's the 20th century, all the children of Nietzsche. So Nietzsche survived into the 20th century, I think, and around there, yeah. But he was really picked up heavily by by people in the 1950s, right?
Just stay here. We're in 1882. Let's forget about what everybody did later. We're here.
Well, I know, but I picked up all these ideas, the dialectic of marriage, so many books out on marriage, history books about monasteries, the books about manners, books about of course, and the attitude of philosophers like Foucault. So these are directly from this idea. And I wanted to point out two things. One is that he talks about moral climates and the genealogy of scholars. In other words, you have generations that would systematically work on their views in the material, and would show you the differences between moral climates. So this is what some people call moral relativism. In other words, exposing the relativity of morality, how it exists in different times differently, and how it exists differently in different places. One morality, like Foucault, explicated in France, and another morality perhaps in Germany, and so on and so forth. And then the last thing is the last paragraph. Science could furnish goals of actions after it is proved that it can take such goals away and annihilate them. And then experimentation would be in order that would allow every kind of heroism to find satisfaction. In other words, trials, scientific trials, centuries of experimentation that might eclipse all the great projects and sacrifices of history to date. These might become really important. So far, science has not yet built its cyclopic buildings. But is anybody seeing AI in that sentence? Science has not yet built cyclopic buildings, but the time for that too will come. So this is a prediction of an AI universe or an AI civilization where all of the goals of action or experimentation or review or discussion would all become available at once. And that's part of the part of the project of AI, to make all of those things available to anyone in a review or discussion of any of these kind of climates or times or places. So I really like
You
that.
think,
Yeah.
okay, well, let's kind of spin that around a little bit for a moment here. Because if all these jobs were done, which of course they're never going to be, the most insidious question of all would emerge into the foreground: whether science can furnish goals of action after it has proved that it can take away such goals and annihilate them. And I would suggest that AI, as an example, is something science has done that takes away a lot of goals. It doesn't, and it actually almost inhibits action. Why open an encyclopedia? Just why even think about something? Just run it through. And I think he's being really critical of that kind of science that he anticipated, not AI specifically, of course, but developments that would lead to this, I think, is germane to what he's saying here. James K.
Yeah, I think he's critiquing and mocking the idea of industriousness and the scientific pursuits that could be carried on in the pursuit of goals that are frivolous and superficial and that are meaningless, and that in our age of science, you could argue and pursue any kind of goal that's just meaningless to your life. For instance, he says, has anyone done research on the different ways of dividing up the day or of the consequences of a regular schedule of work, festival, and the rest? Do we know the moral effect of foods? Is there a philosophy of nutrition? The incessantly erupting clamor for and against vegetarianism proves that there is still no such philosophy. In other words, it has nothing to do with philosophy, these various pursuits of research, and that you can spend, waste your time. Once science provides some goal of action and you prove or make some kind of, headway, then you need to do experimentation to prove it or something. And then, so this could go on for forever, experimenting that might last for centuries and eclipse all great projects and sacrifice of history to date. And so it is, I think he's saying that it's a waste of time, for this kind of industriousness to be occurring, and people are just doing meaningless, frivolous things just in pursuit of these mindless, goals.
What do you make of the first sentence then? Anyone who now wishes to make a study of moral matters opens up for himself an immense field for work. And then that whole list.
Right. So, if you want to study, it goes with the other aphorism about morals, category imperative, that morality is there's an infinite there's an infinite number of moralities that you will find if you study morality throughout the various cultures and people's lives and individuals. And so it could be an immense field of work that could last forever, but it's meaningless to do that. You have to kind of like limit what you want to study. And he's critiquing that kind of morality that only believes that there's only one such morality. But if you want to go with him and say you want to study all these moralities, that's also very superficial and meaningless.
I
That's
don't
issue.
I don't think he's saying meaningless anywhere in that section. Where are you getting the meaningless part of it?
Well, I think that the title of it is something for the industrious, right? If people are industrious, they could do almost anything they want to, but is it really meaningful to do it? Are they asking the right questions? Are they pursuing the right goals? I mean, philosophically, are they really doing anything that relates to the improvement of their lives or what is meaningful in their lives? I mean, so I that's my interpretation anyway.
See, I disagree with you totally. I think he's advocating all of these possible things to think about and learn about and come to know.
Right. But what about he says, has anyone done research on the different ways of dividing up the day or of the consequences of a regular schedule work? Is that something that would be meaningful to do? I mean,
Time management, James.
yeah,
Why
right.
would-
Time management is good, but do you
Frederick-
need to do endless research on doing that?
I
No,
think it was
he's-
done. Yeah, they had operational research experts in the 1930s and
Mhm.
40s that did that.
Frederick Taylor, right? Taylorism was to get everybody on the assembly line down to perfect timing. So it was important to know what the routines were and all that.
Okay.
I don't think he's discounting knowledge itself. I think he's applauding the pursuit of knowledge. I'm not
Right.
sure that he thinks anything is particularly frivolous. And I think that list is just, he thinks the world, the feeling I get, and even as far as we are in this, is that he thinks the world is a lot more complicated than a lot of the philosophers that he was the heir to thought. Kant thought he'd locked it up. Hegel thought he figured it out. Hume did too. And I think Nietzsche is coming along going, oh man, there is so much more to think about to arrive at an answer, if there even is an answer to this whole thing. I think that's where he's coming from. And that's the impression I get here from this anyway. Quan.
Well, that's also my impression because I would like to read again the first sentence with three lines at the end. Anyone who now wishes to make a study of moral matters opens up for himself an immense field of work. And I go down almost at the end. Yet another new project would be to determine the erroneousness of all these reasons and the whole essence of moral judgments to date. I would say that Nietzsche is opening precisely what I call the three fields of mind activities. Because I call the first field the myth, the second field the fact, and the third field the truth. So in the paragraph that we read from 1 to 6, he was attacking sotto voce the category of myth, okay, and duty. I think is one of those categories that I would put into myth concerning mind activities. And in this paragraph, something for the industrious, when he was listing a lot of stuff to study, regular schedule for word festival is the philosophy of nutrition, the moral effects of food, blah blah blah. All those stuff is in the field of facts, and he was right. We don't have so much objective science about a lot of stuff that would be categorized into facts. And finally, what I read Yet another new project would be to determine the erroneousness of all these reasons and the whole essence of moral judgment today. Okay, and there we enter into the most difficult field for the human mind activities, truth. Okay, when I said that Nietzsche, after all, is a classical philosopher, and I I make a precision on my thought that classical philosopher for me is a timeless philosopher. Okay, it's philosophia, the lover of truth, and there precisely it's about that. What would be the foundation of true morality? So he was right. It's absolutely a immense field of work that he was opening. I stop here.
Yeah, I think you're creating your own mythology over there, Kwan, but that's okay. That's okay if that's how you're going to approach this. I don't see anything in there about truth. And I don't think we've read anything so far with like truth with a capital T. And right in, I don't know, it was the second or third sentence in, so far all that has given color to existence still lacks a history. This isn't just a pile of, this isn't a pile of just random facts that are all stacked up. It's investigations of these things that are important to people in their lives, but are unexplored. Anyway, Jason.
Yeah, first I need to thank you, Audrey, to give me a view to how to read this one, because yeah, I've been poisoned by a lot of philosophical essays, try to think about what he want to talk about. But actually, he probably not yet talking about anything. I think his madness, I think you make the right word, his madness could be the most powerful argument anyway. But I'm a little surprised nobody mentioned this, okay? Because he talked about the where can you find the history of love, of avarice, of envy, of conscience, of piety, of cruelty, and then he talked about how about the philosophy of nutrition. I think we read untimely meditation. He talked about underuse and abuse of history of life, right? He talked about he's strongly against the historicism. And I think at least, I'm not sure the whole section is about, but at least in this short few sentences, he seems connected to that essay and criticize how people view his, or we only see a small portion of the history, right? There's a lot part of history we don't see, So that's what I get on this one, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That's interesting. See, that makes me feel good about having done that essay, that we do spend time with that, because you're bringing that in. I think that's cool. Juan.
Okay, I want to quote Nietzsche on section 7 and section 6 on what I think can be the justification for the notion of truth. Okay, so first, section 7. The same applies to the demonstrations of the reasons for the variety of moral climates. Why does the sun of one fundamental moral judgment and primary value standard shine here and another one there? Yet another new project would be to determine the erroneousness of all these reasons and the whole essence of moral judgment to date. So for Nietzsche, it was not only almost a, how can I say it, an arbitrary declaration of categorical imperative, okay? Because the categorical imperative, after all, what is it? Is it an arbitrary declaration from Kant that there is a moral obligation that is unconditional and not depending on personal circumstances? And the short sentence that I want to read from section 6 is that, okay, formally one could tell just by looking at the person that he wanted to think, it was probably a rare occurrence that he now wanted to become wiser. And I think that the idea that someone wants to become wiser, it's not a stuff concerning myth, it's not a stuff concerning facts, but it's a stuff concerning truth. Okay, if you read the okay, I know that you don't want people to quote from other authors, but if you read all Plato's, it's about that. I stop here.
You know, he had a lot of respect for Plato, but he's not doing that here. I mean, for you, he's doing that. But I don't think you made your case, Quan. So well, I'll just leave it at that because we don't have a whole lot of time left here. So James.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the fact that I said originally, I believe around the time that I was beginning this book after reading the tragedy and Birth of Tragedy and the piece on Schopenhauer. I was kind of like just beginning to pigeonhole Nietzsche a little more than I was before. I was sort of like saying, well, he separated himself from Schopenhauer in that he is separating out the pessimism. He's not as pessimistic anymore. He doesn't want to forward that idea of constant pessimism and or a pessimistic life philosophy. And but he does have the idea of like will that dominates his thinking. So anyway, so I'm just saying that I'm sort of I see a methodology here, and the methodology is not quite the methodology is emerging. And so I think we have an emergent methodology, and I won't say what it is because I don't want anyone to say I'm wrong. And that's part of like his methodology. He does sort of avoid, to a certain extent, by his alinear argumentation. He avoids perhaps distinct criticism. In other words, I said this, but I also said that, kind of thing. So you don't necessarily have one paragraph inviting a ton of criticism, perhaps because the next paragraph might balance it to a certain extent. But I think this, I think it's a good methodology, and I think we're going to, we're going to get the full effect of it. And I have a much better appreciation of that now than I had before. I thought he was basically trying to replicate Schopenhauer in his skepticism, but I see where he's trying to make the skepticism a productive core of his philosophical investigation, and I see how it works. So I appreciate that a lot more.
Oh, good. That's great. James K.
Yeah, I wanted to juxtapose this like Quan just did with the last aphorism, number 6, about thinking, right? Thinking as a kind of way of as a dignity and concern with becoming wiser. So I was wondering if this kind of scientific research he refers to as goals of action and experimentation is consistent with that kind of thinking that he's advocating in number 6. And so I'm willing to agree with you that maybe he is advocating for this kind of curiosity about being industrious and following through with these kind of research activities, to get some answers about scheduling and nutrition and whether vegetarianism can be proved as a philosophy or not, and so forth. Yeah.
Thanks. At the end of the Birth of Tragedy, at the end of the part that we read anyway, it's a curious attack on science. And in the essay on history, he does something very similar. That just the sheer accumulation of knowledge is bad. you need, and that is the problem with science, is that science doesn't produce action. It doesn't come up with a reason to go do something except more research. And there needs to be more motivation for life itself, not just knowledge for knowledge's sake. That's something that he was attacking. So there's more going on here, but thanks for that. Audrey, you're going to get the last word.
Oh, good. That's cool. My last word is I want people to look at the difference here in number 7 with 6 in terms of, here is the first time. I didn't read Birth of Tragedy. I think that's the only one I haven't read. So if he says anything, this followed that. This.
No.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a bit later.
Oh, okay. Never mind. All right. Never mind. So
Wait, Audrey. Birth of Tragedy was his very first published book. Okay, we're 10 years later right now, or 8 years later. The other was 1872. We're in 1882.
Okay.
So
okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if he mentions if anybody talks about the difference between what he means by consequences and by morals, because I find it very interesting that he has even a comparative history of law or even of punishment is so far lacking entirely. And we all know, okay, but folk, who did that? Has anyone done research on a different way of dividing up the day or the consequences of a regular schedule, festivals and the rest? Do we know the moral effects of foods? So to me, consequences is really important. And that knowledge for knowledge's sake, the way you're talking about it, is one kind of knowledge, and it could be scientific knowledge. Or, I read what so-and-so said and I got what he said. That's a particular kind of knowledge. But what are the consequences of actually studying something? And that's when you bring in the moral climate that he's talking about. Why is it different in one place as opposed to another? So he's asking us to look at the consequences. So what's the difference? So why is there this argument about being a vegetarian good or bad? What are the consequences of being a vegetarian? What are how do you weigh it in a society, based on the moral climates? It has only to do with eating animals. And I can see you're looking very enthusiastic to speak, James. So I'll hurry up because you want the last word, right? I don't know. Please speak to that, because it's very interesting to me, the consequences and the morals. And I think this is to me, an important part of where he goes in the future. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I agree with you. I brought up the thing from Birth of Tragedy because that was a critique of science. And the scientific attitude, well, whatever, he had his reasons at the time. And I think that was a more immature phase in his life. He seems to have a much more respect for science. But that last line is almost taken. Whether science can furnish goals of action after it has proved that it can take such goals away and annihilate them. That's right out of Birth of Tragedy, that fear that science would not be conducive or productive of a reason to live. Right? And well, that played more of a role in the essays. It hasn't come to the surface here yet. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I do know, but I'm not going to tell you. James.
Yeah, thanks for that challenge. I'll be quick. Sorry about that.
30 seconds, and then I'm just shutting it.
All right. So this matters of scholars, businessmen, artists, and artisans have been studied and thought about. You're absolutely right, Audrey. It matters for morals. And there's a book by Peter Thiel, who is is supposed to be extremely important in the philosophy of Donald Trump, and the idea that these people that evolve. Elon Musk is another one. He talks out loud about what his philosophical comments that drive his political decisions are. Yeah,
James.
that's 30 seconds. I got it. Yeah.
None of that here. I don't ever want to hear Trump's name again at this.
All right. But we did mention the Übermensch, didn't we?
Okay, another 30 words. Okay, Trump is another 30 words.
All right. Okay, we're done, people. So I will be posting the next one within the hour. I've already got the draft prepared. I just have to indicate which aphorisms we're going to be reading next. And this was a great discussion. Again, thank all of you for your participation. I'm having a really good time here. Alyssa, I wish you'd shown up earlier because it's too late now. Okay, bye, you guys.
Thank you.